Maya, Season 1, Episode 2, Part 1. What Mrs. Chen Knew. Previously on Maya, a young woman arrived in Singapore with $300 and one dream. She failed her first interview in 4 seconds of silence. She got a second interview. She held the silence. She got the job. And on the morning of her first day, she opened her apartment door and found a plate of food that nobody had asked to leave. This is what happened next. The plate was white, ceramic, worn at the edges in the way that things get worn when they have been part of a daily life for years. On it, rice, steamed vegetables, a small piece of fish cooked with ginger and soy, and beside the plate, on a folded piece of paper, 3 words written in careful English. Eat before you go. No name, no explanation. Maya stood in the doorway in her interview clothes, the same ones she had ironed 3 times the night before, and looked at the plate and the note and the empty corridor. She looked left. She looked right. The corridor was silent. She picked up the plate and went inside. She ate every bite standing at her kitchen counter. The fish was perfectly seasoned. The rice was exactly the right temperature. Someone had timed this. She left for work at 8:15 a.m. without knocking on Mrs. Chen's door. She told herself it was because she was running late. She told herself there would be a simple explanation. She was wrong. Maya's first day at Meridian Advisory was on a Monday. 12 floors, glass and steel. The kind of building that says, if you work here, you have arrived somewhere. Her manager's name was David Lim, 38 years old, Singaporean Chinese. Efficient in the way that some people are efficient, not as a skill, but as a personality. He showed her to her desk. He gave her a laptop and a stack of onboarding documents 4 centimeters thick. He said, "Read these by Wednesday. Questions go in an email. I respond between 9 and 10. He walked back to his office. The young Indian man at the desk beside her was typing at a speed that suggested he had been doing it since birth. He stopped when she looked at him. She said, "I'm Maya. I started today." He said, "I know. I'm Raj." She said, "Is he always like that?" Raj said, "David, like what?" She said, "Efficient." Something moved across Raj's face. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. He said, "He's not cold. He's just precise. Cold people don't notice you. Precise people notice everything." He turned back to his screen. By 4 p.m., Maya had 4 questions she couldn't answer herself. She put them in an email. Subject: 4 questions from onboarding. Maya Santos. She sent it at 4:47 p.m. At 5:03 p.m., David Lim walked out of his office, stood beside her desk, and answered all 4 questions verbally in under 3 minutes. Then he went back inside. Raj said, without looking up, "I told you." Maya said, "He came out." Raj said, "He always does. He just doesn't want you to know he will." She thought about that on the train home. Precision versus coldness. The difference between someone who does not care and someone who cares in a way that does not look like caring. She was still thinking about it when she reached her building and saw the light under Mrs. Chen's door. She stopped. Then she knocked. The door opened. Mrs. Chen was 71 years old, small, 5 feet, maybe less, with white hair cut short and eyes that performed the specific function of looking at you and knowing more than you had said. Maya said, "I'm Maya, 3B. I wanted to thank you for the food this morning." Mrs. Chen said, "I know I didn't have to." Maya said, "Can I ask why you did?" Mrs. Chen looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You were wearing your interview clothes when you moved in. On a Sunday. with one suitcase. You had an interview the next morning. You were trying to look like you belonged somewhere before you knew if they would let you in. Maya felt something move in her chest. The specific sensation of being understood by someone who had no obligation to understand you. She said, "How did you know?" Mrs. Chen said, "Because I did the same thing, 43 years ago." She said, "Come in. I'll make tea." The apartment was the same size as Maya's, but felt like a different universe. Books on every surface, not decorative books, red books, with broken spines and folded pages and notes in the margins. Photographs on the wall spanning what looked like 5 decades. From the kitchen, Mrs. Chen said, "Where are you from?" Maya said, "Philippines, Cebu." Mrs. Chen said, "I'm from Shanghai. I came to Singapore in 1983 with 2 suitcases and an accounting degree and $40 American." Maya sat on the edge of the sofa. She said, $40. Mrs. Chen came out with 2 cups of tea and sat in the armchair across from her. She said, $40. And I spoke English the way I had learned it, correctly, grammatically, completely wrong for the room I was walking into. Maya said, "What do you mean wrong for the room?" Mrs. Chen said, "I mean that English is not one language. It is a collection of languages that share a grammar. The English I learned in Shanghai was the English of textbooks. The English I needed in Singapore was the English of negotiation, of hierarchy, of knowing when to speak and when to be silent, and what the silence meant." Maya said, "Nobody teaches that." Mrs. Chen said, "No, they don't." Outside Singapore at night, lights and the permanent hum of a city that never completely stops. Mrs. Chen said, "How was your first day?" Maya said, "I sent my manager 4 questions by email. He came out of his office and answered them verbally." Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow slightly. She said, "David Lim." Maya stopped. She said, "You know him?" Mrs. Chen said, "I know of him." Something in the way she said it. Maya said, "How?" Mrs. Chen said, "Meridian Advisory was founded by a man named Robert Chen." A pause. "He was my husband." The silence that followed was full of 43 years and 2 suitcases and $40 American and something Maya did not yet have all the pieces to understand. She said, "Was?" Mrs. Chen said, "He died 4 years ago." Maya said, "I'm sorry." Mrs. Chen said, "Don't be. He built something that outlasted him. That's what he wanted." Then she said, "The company your manager works for, the company you now work for, I used to run it." Maya looked at her. Mrs. Chen looked back. And in the space between them, something shifted. The way things shift when you realize the person across from you is not who you thought they were. Maya said, "Why did you leave food outside my door?" Mrs. Chen said, "Because 43 years ago someone left food outside mine, and I never found out who." She stood. She took Maya's empty cup. She said, "Get some sleep. Second days are harder than first days." Maya walked to the door. She stopped. She said, "Mrs. Chen, why are you living here, in this building, in a small apartment? If your husband founded," Mrs. Chen said, "that is a longer conversation." She opened the door. Maya stepped into the corridor. Mrs. Chen said, "One more thing." Maya turned. Mrs. Chen said, "David Lim knows who I am. He has never mentioned it to anyone in that office. There is a reason for that." She closed the door. Maya stood in the corridor for a long time. She thought about $40, 2 suitcases, a woman who had run a company and now lived in a small apartment and left food outside doors without explaining why. She thought about David Lim knowing and saying nothing. She thought about the reason for that. She did not sleep well, but before she closed her eyes, she thought about what Mrs. Chen had said. The English of negotiation, of hierarchy, of knowing when to speak and when to be silent, and what the silence meant. She had thought, after the second interview, that she had learned the silence. She was beginning to understand that the silence had levels, and she had only learned the first one. Maya did not knock on Mrs. Chen's door the next morning. She told herself it was because she needed time to think. The truth was simpler and less flattering. She was not sure what questions to ask, and she had learned, slowly and at some cost, that walking into a conversation without knowing what you want from it is a way of losing it before it begins. So she went to work. Tuesday at Meridian Advisory was different from Monday in the way that second days are always different. The newness had worn off, and what was left was the actual place, the actual people, the actual weight of being somewhere that had existed before you arrived and would continue existing in a specific direction that you had not yet been told about. She sat at her desk. Raj was already there. He was always already there. She would learn later that he arrived at 7:45 every morning and left at exactly 6:15 every evening, and that this was not dedication, but system. He had decided that 10 hours was the correct amount of time to spend in a place like this, and he enforced it with the precision of someone who understood that the alternative was giving the place more than it deserved. He looked up when she sat down. He said, "You look like you didn't sleep." She said, "I slept." He said, "You look like you slept, but you were thinking the whole time." She looked at him. She said, "Does that happen to you?" He said, "Every night for 3 years." She said, "What do you think about?" He said, "The same thing everyone thinks about at 2 a.m. in a city that isn't theirs." She said, "Which is?" He said, "Whether they made the right choice coming here." A pause. She said, "Did you?" Raj looked at his screen. He said, "Ask me in another 3 years." David Lim walked out of his office at 9:07 a.m. He stopped at Maya's desk. He had a folder in his hand and the expression of someone who had already made a decision about something and was now informing you of it. He said, "The Hartwell account. I'm adding you to it." Maya said, "I've been here 2 days." David said, "I know." She said, "What's the Hartwell account?" He said, "Complicated." He put the folder on her desk. He said, "Read it. Come see me at 2. He walked back to his office. Raj, without looking up, said, "Hartwell." Maya said, "You know it?" Raj said, "Everyone knows it." She said, "What is it?" Raj stopped typing. He turned his chair slightly toward her. This, she would learn, was how Raj indicated that what he was about to say mattered. Not by lowering his voice or leaning forward, but by the specific act of turning his chair 3 degrees in your direction. He said, "Marcus Hartwell, British, late 50s. He's been a client of Meridian for 11 years. His portfolio is the second largest the company manages. He's also particular." She said, "Particular how?" Raj said, "He's had 4 relationship managers in 3 years. Each one lasted between 4 and 8 months." She said, "What happened to them?" Raj said, 2 resigned, 1 was reassigned. One is still here actually. Junior analyst. Took a significant step back." Maya looked at the folder on her desk. She said, "Why is David putting me on this?" Raj turned his chair back to his screen. He said, "That is an excellent question." She opened the folder. Marcus Hartwell, born 1967, London. Inherited a property development company at 31 when his father died. Expanded it across Southeast Asia over 20 years. Net worth. She stopped at the number and read it again. Then she turned the page. What followed was 12 pages of financial analysis, portfolio breakdowns, risk assessments, and meeting notes. The meeting notes were the most interesting part. Not for what they said, but for what they didn't say. They were precise, professional, and completely empty of anything human. Whoever had written them had been very careful to describe what Marcus Hartwell did without ever touching on what he was like. She went to see David at 2 o'clock. He was at his desk. He did not look up immediately when she came in. Not rudeness, but the completion of a thought before starting another. She waited. After 11 seconds, he looked up. He said, "Sit." She sat. He said, "What did you think?" She said, "The meeting notes are incomplete." He looked at her. She said, "They describe outcomes but not dynamics. I don't have a sense of who this person is from these notes. I have a sense of what he owns." David Lim was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The previous managers found him difficult." She said, "Difficult how?" David said, "He is very intelligent. He knows when he's being managed and he doesn't like it. He communicates in a specific way that some people find hard to follow." She said, "What way?" David said, "He rarely says what he means directly. He tends to reference things, other conversations, other situations, other people, and expects you to understand the connection without being told what it is." Maya said, "He speaks in subtext." David looked at her with the expression of someone who had just had a thing named that they had been trying to name for a long time. He said, "Yes." She said, "Why are you putting me on his account? I've been here 2 days." David said, "Because the people who lasted longest with him were not the ones with the most experience. They were the ones who listened the best." A pause. She said, "And you think I listen well?" He said, "I think you sent me 4 questions instead of 11. And when I came to your desk to answer them, you let me finish every sentence before you responded." He said, "Marcus Hartwell is coming in on Thursday. You'll sit in." She said, "As what?" He said, "As someone who is learning the account." She said, "Does he know that?" David said, "He knows everything that happens in this office." She stood to leave. David said, "One more thing." She stopped. He said, "Don't try to impress him. Don't perform competence, just listen. If he asks you something directly, answer it directly. If he says something you don't understand, say so." She said, "That's it." He said, "The last person who sat in that meeting tried to demonstrate their knowledge of his portfolio in the first 10 minutes. Hartwell asked them one question they couldn't answer. They resigned 3 weeks later." She said, "What was the question?" David said, "He asked them what they thought he actually wanted." A pause. She said, "What does he actually want?" David looked at her. He said, "Thursday, 2 o'clock." She walked back to her desk. Raj was watching her return with the expression of someone who had been trying not to watch. He said, "Thursday?" She said, "Thursday." He said, "I'll be here if you need to debrief afterward." She said, "You've met him?" Raj said, "Once, briefly. He looked at me for about 4 seconds and then asked David if the company had changed its hiring criteria." She said, "That's insulting." Raj said, "I thought so too. Then I realized he wasn't being insulting. He was testing David's reaction." She said, "What did David do?" Raj said, "He said, The criteria have always been the same. We hire people who are better at their jobs than we expected them to be. A pause. Maya said, "And Hartwell?" Raj said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. That evening, Maya took the long way home. Singapore in the early evening had a specific quality. The heat of the day releasing, the city shifting registers from work to something else, the streets filling with people who had finished one version of their day and were moving toward another. She thought about subtext, about people who say things obliquely and expect you to follow, about the difference between communication and performance, about a man who had burned through 4 relationship managers in 3 years and the question he had asked the last one. What do you actually want? She stopped outside her building. She thought about Mrs. Chen, who had left food outside her door without explanation, who had run a company and now lived in a small apartment, who had said, "David Lim knows who I am, and there is a reason he has never mentioned it." She went upstairs and knocked. The door opened. Mrs. Chen looked at her without surprise. Maya said, "I have a question." Mrs. Chen said, "Come in." She did not make tea this time. She sat in her chair and Maya sat on the sofa, and outside the city did what cities do at this hour. Maya said, "Why did you leave the company?" Mrs. Chen said, "Which answer do you want? The official one or the true one?" Maya said, "I didn't know there were 2. Mrs. Chen said, "There are always 2. Maya said, "The true one." Mrs. Chen said, "My husband built Meridian Advisory. I ran it for 6 years after he became ill. When he died, the board decided the company needed new leadership, new direction, new energy." That was the word they used. Energy. Maya said, "They pushed you out." Mrs. Chen said, "They asked me to consider my legacy, which is a very elegant way of asking someone to leave." She looked at the window. She said, "I had 2 choices. I could fight. I had the grounds. I had the relationships. I had the history of the place in ways none of them did. Or I could decide that the company was not the point, that Robert was not the building. He was what we built together, and that was already done." Maya said, "Do you regret it?" Mrs. Chen said, "Every day." She said it without drama, as a fact. Then she said, "And not at all. Both of those things are true simultaneously. That is something they also don't teach you." Maya said, "David Lim. He was there when they asked you to leave?" Mrs. Chen said, "He was junior then. He said nothing." She paused. "But the week after I left, he sent me a letter, handwritten. He said, 'What happened was wrong.' He said, 'I don't know if this changes anything.' He said, 'I wanted you to know that someone in that room understood what it cost.'" Maya sat with that. She said, "And he's never mentioned it since?" Mrs. Chen said, "He came to see me once, about a year after. He sat where you're sitting. We talked for 2 hours. He has not come back." She looked at Maya. She said, "But he sends someone every year." Maya said, "What do you mean?" Mrs. Chen said, "A new person, young, promising, someone he thinks has the quality that the company needs more of. He finds a reason to put them on a difficult account, and he sends them here, to this building, knowing I'll notice." Maya said, "He put you on my floor." Mrs. Chen said, "He recommended the apartment to me 4 years ago when I needed somewhere smaller." "Yes." Maya said, "He put me on the Hartwell account." Mrs. Chen said, "Did he?" Not a question. Maya said, "Are you going to tell me what that means?" Mrs. Chen looked at her with those eyes that knew more than you had said. She said, "Marcus Hartwell is not a difficult client." She said, He is a man who is looking for something. He has been looking for it for 11 years. Every manager who has sat across from him has tried to give him financial returns, risk management, portfolio strategy. She said, none of them understood that what he was actually asking was a different question entirely. Maya said, what question? Mrs. Chen stood. She walked to her desk by the window. She picked up a small card, cream-colored, with handwriting on it. She held it for a moment without turning around. Then she said, there is a reason Marcus Hartwell has been a client of Meridian for 11 years, despite going through 4 managers. He is not looking for someone to manage his money. She turned. She held out the card. Maya took it. On it, in the same careful handwriting as the note left outside her door, were 4 words. She read them. She looked up. Mrs. Chen said, Thursday. Don't be late. She opened the door, and Maya walked out into the corridor holding a card that had just changed everything she thought she understood about why she was here. The 4 words on the card. You will find out what they were at the start of episode 3, but I will tell you this much. They were not about money. They were never about money. They were about something that Marcus Hartwell had lost 11 years ago in a boardroom in London on a Tuesday afternoon. And they were written in the handwriting of a woman who had once lost something similar in a boardroom in Singapore on a Thursday.